Yeah, I'm delighted to join the conversation. Could we have the full screen back on? Do you
Yes,
think that's
please.
a possibility? Then
Yeah.
we can all see each other, which would be absolutely lovely. And I can see Steve. Well, I should say I was incredibly honoured, Steve, to be asked to write the forward. We've known each other since our late 20s, when nobody knew who we were, basically. Actually, there are still a lot of people who don't know who we are, but particularly that was true. And I think for a long time, um, I was way ahead of Steve conceptually on leadership, and he was way ahead of me practically on leadership. And I think those things are coming together now, and I see that in the book. Certainly, this book, by the way, which is not just a conceptual book. Steve's given the highlights personally and strategically, but there's there's a lot of very rich case study material in here and examples from all over the world, not just from England or even from English-speaking countries, but from all over the world that really give depth and vibrancy to the book. And would be great for other leaders to reflect on, actually, because they'll probably recognize themselves in terms of some of the ridiculous things that occur in the examples that theories of leadership have nothing to say about. I thought about your grid, Steve, a lot when writing the forward, and I spent a lot of my time, I think, in my 20s and 30s in the bottom right-hand quadrant. So what I would call smart and enthusiastic, fighting people on the left-hand side of the quadrant, usually older men, because women hadn't moved up into leadership much by then, who were kind of stale and stagnant. And in my 30s, I would say, when things didn't work, there's probably a middle category between those two boxes where I became bitter and accusatory and decided, well, if things weren't working, it was everybody else's fault. And if they're just as smart as me, then we get things done. In my 40s, I got a bit better, but was still on the middle of that line. And when things didn't work in my 40s, I blamed myself instead of blaming them, and spent a lot of time being disappointed and regretful. So the top right-hand cell is definitely the way to be. And in some ways, I think, Steve, as leadership has become more diverse, but certainly I've learned a lot from women leaders myself, and it's been easier to be a leader with more inclusive and collaborative forms of leadership that many women represent, and people of diversity. So I wonder if the first of two questions I could ask you is, there are many kinds of diversity in the examples in your book: racial diversity, linguistic diversity, gender identity forms of diversity, neurodiversity, cognitive diversity. Could you talk a bit about, within your book and beyond that, what role you think diversity plays in leadership?
That's a great question, actually. Thank you, Andy. In answer to that, I'd like to just tell a brief story. In 2007, when I was chief exec of the National College for School Leadership, we had a program which is called Encouraging Black and Ethnic Minority Leaders into Headship, into Senior Leadership. And the National College was promoting that program, and I was really positive about it. And I went to a program, an event as part of that program in Bradford in England. And it was a key moment in my learning, because I just completely changed my view about diversity and leadership at that meeting. Because until then, I'd seen diversity as a fairness issue, as a kind of human rights issue. We wanted to have a more diverse leadership because it was fair. We shouldn't, the white males shouldn't predominate. It's just not fair. And I came out as a kind of fairness issue. And what I learned from this wonderful woman called Rosemary Campbell-Stevens, two things, and it really changed my thinking. One was, it's actually not just about fairness. It's actually about having a better team. By having a diverse team, you just have a better team. You avoid groupthink. You include a wider range of perspectives that's more likely to be representative of the people in your broader community. So I had some kind of deficit model of diversity instead of a positive model about what diverse teams bring to an organization. And that was a huge shift in my thinking. But the other thing that Rosemary Campbell-Stevens said to me, which I really, really hadn't thought about before, is if we perpetuate a single kind of stereotypical approach to leadership, we'll only encourage certain types of people to want to be leaders. We will not encourage a diverse group of people to want to be leaders if there's only one way of leading that's the right way of leading. And so if we want to, and this has had a big effect on me, if we want to have a more diverse leadership in our organization, women, people of Black and ethnic minority, LGBT, etc., then having diverse leadership models and celebrating the diversity of leadership rather than having a stereotypical model is really important. And I think those two learnings for me, and I think they do come through in the book, but maybe not as much as they should, have been really helpful in my thinking about diversity and leadership.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to put in, if we could share the LearnLab code, because we would love to get some questions from our membership and also something that resonates. So you could ask questions or things that you're commenting on. And I know that Larry, you put into the chat that you were wondering when we could ask a question, and perhaps you want to do that open mic. Please go ahead.
Okay, and thanks very much, Trista, and thanks, Steve. So while I have to confess I haven't read the second volume, Steve, I actually didn't. I thought we were still talking about the first book, so I didn't realise there'd been a second one. So I've been listening carefully to your presentation. The question I want to throw into the mix is, well, one, is the difference between leadership and management, because I think that's quite important in education systems. But also, the absolutely critical role of values as a context for how leadership operates. Because if we were just discussing leadership in the abstract, there are many effective leaders of the wrong agenda. And we could cite people from history who were effective leaders, by some metrics, but most of us on this call would have diametrically opposite views in relation to what's important and what the values are. And it just seems to me that in education terms, this is absolutely critical. So if you start from a predisposition to collaboration and collegiality, then you're already halfway on the journey to being an effective leader, because you don't see yourself at the top of a pinnacle. You see yourself as part of a team. And some of the areas that you've highlighted there, Steve, in the presentation, around how you grow other people's leaderships, well, those are almost intrinsic to collaborative leadership approaches. So I just think we absolutely have to caveat all of the discussion around having the basic concepts and values in place before we begin. Whatever level you're being a leader. And then just my second observation, because I've been a pedagogical leader when I was in the classroom, and for the last decade I've been a leader of a teachers' trade union. And I was reflecting on some of the similarities and differences. So in a teachers' trade union, you are subject to the policy decisions of your membership. But what struck me was that actually, ultimately, when I was a classroom practitioner and head of department and deputy, my starting point was a fundamental belief in the ability of the teachers with whom I was working. And as a trade union leader, my starting point is a fundamental belief in the professionalism of my members. So I think that's also an important prerequisite, that you actually believe in the people, whom you're working with, and that then gives you that context for the kind of dynamic leadership that you're referencing, Steve. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Thanks, Larry. I think I agree with you very strongly, and I think I'm trying to say in the book, on both books actually, that if we think we're perfect, I mean, Donald Trump is an example of a leader who thinks that he's perfect. We could have some success, but if we want long-term sustainable success, we've got to take people with us. And an imperfect mindset believes in other people because they know they don't know all the answers themselves. An imperfect leader with an imperfect leadership mindset tries to do the right thing and is authentic in how they operate. So it is about values. It is about believing in other people, because you can't do it on your own, and they have something to give as well as you having something to give, and that's a fundamental part of the imperfect leadership mindset. So I think I really quite strongly agree with you on that one.
Thanks very much. So hopefully people have been commenting. We have a few minutes to ask Steve some questions. Oh, great. There are some comments. Steve, wow. I'm just reading them now, so sorry. Yeah. Excellent. I know. Thank you for putting in some likes. Those will help us.
Yes, guide. Please.
Yeah. So I'll just read the one right now that has 2 likes and says there are tremendous headwinds to collaborative leadership. So many school leadership roles are embedded in systems that expect isolated work, from classroom teaching to state or province level education agencies. How do we row together to create an expectation of sharing power and decision-making that demonstrate power grows that way rather than weakens? Great question.
Yeah. We all know in ARC that the way to build improvement in our systems is not to be the great I am, but to build stakeholder engagement and to build collaboration. And that's what the policies, you can pull a lever in the headquarters in your office, but you're not going to have much impact unless you build a sense of shared endeavor. So that idea of building a critical mass of engagement, of collaboration, is at the heart of what good policy leadership is all about, and also what imperfect leadership is all about too.
Thanks, Steve. There's a question here too about how we coped with negative organizational cultures. I can't imagine we have any idea of what that might be, but do you have any suggestions, or what did you learn from?
Well, it's a tough one. And I think I'll just say 2 things. One is, you could try to focus on what you can create within the culture that you can directly influence, because you can't directly influence the whole thing unless you are the person ultimately in charge. If you're not the person ultimately in charge, focus on the culture that you can help to create within your bit of the organization. And if that is proving to be completely frustrating for you, and you find you cannot operate authentically in that environment, then you have to consider whether or not you have to move elsewhere.
I'm seeing a connection here. Thanks for the need. So number 13 says we need to break the systemic model that's currently the norm, and then linking it really with number 8 to think about, how do we support leaders to not appoint leaders just like them, so that same status quo continues? How do we recognize the value of difference and diversity, and that idea that Larry brought up with values as a filter potentially? And
I think that's a great point, and I think it's a real problem that we are kind of narrow in our thinking about the kind of leaders that we need. And our definition of talent is very narrow and fixed. And I do think we need to find ways in which we can challenge ourselves about talent. I used to say, there's bound to be people in your organization that weren't flourishing till you came and are now flourishing because you recognize their talent. But when you leave, who are your successor spot that you missed? Because we all have this problem about bias. So find ways in which you can bring people in to challenge you on that, There are some talent management frameworks that help you to do that, by the way. So you're not just reiterating your kind of stereotypical view of what talent looks like.
Thanks. And we only have time really to comment on one more, and I'm going to choose one that really speaks to me, the idea of number 10, when failures are public. How do you manage the fallout to move on? And your story did echo a little bit of the public.
I've had lots of failures. I think the main thing about this is apologize. If you've upset someone or you've messed up, apologize authentically. Don't say, I'm sorry if. You say, I am responsible and I got it wrong. And then put it right. If you apologize genuinely and put it right, your credibility will go up as a leader. If you don't apologize, your credibility will go down. And if you apologize but don't put it right, your credibility will go down. So apologize and then put it right. That's the way to increase your credibility as a leader.